We are ranking Disney movies today from the absolute terrible to the very, very best, and only the 3D ones this time. Mostly just because, in general, if you look at my channel, it's all 3D stuff, but also, I haven't actually seen every 2D Disney movie yet. There's a lot of them, you know? There's like 60 or 70 of them. Mouse Detective, Fantasia, Aristocats, and Black Cauldron. Sorry, I'll get around to it. And so starting off at the very, very bottom, what do you think is the most terrible 3D Disney movie? Because if you ask me, I think it's pretty clear, and it's unfortunately a recent one. Hey, it's not the golden era of Disney anymore. To me, the movie at the very bottom of our list has to be Disney's Wish. I even have to use the word Disney in the title because just saying the Wish movie, no one knows what the hell you're bloody well talking about. But poor one-word naming choices aside, this movie is just the biggest train wreck I've ever seen in cinemas from mainline Disney. Visually, it looks kind of flat because of a sort of crayon storybook aesthetic they're going for, but not done well at all. The writing is absolutely atrocious in how it's trying to be both a super corporate 100-year later homage to every Disney movie by doing them all a horrendous injustice a century later. The song numbers are absolutely abysmal and so pathetically simplistic, forgettable, memeable. Hey, I guess there's that. And also just the very fact that it is meant to be the legacy movie for Disney celebrating all of their accolades, it's just could not be more going down in flames than ever. It is a stain on the legacy of Disney for the very fact that it's being platformed in the first place. Now, with most of the movies that we're going to be covering, I've likely done an individual video on them to really express my thoughts out. I've been doing this animated movie thing for 5 years now somehow. And if I haven't already done a terrible on half of these movies, I sure am planning to probably this year. But Disney's Wish is really one of those enigmatic movies where the more you think about it, the more you realize how terrible it was. Why are all the friends based off of the Seven Dwarfs, and then they don't really do anything good with it in any way? And in fact, if you look at pretty much every character in this movie, you could maybe make a spin to see potential within them. I think there's a lot of options they could have done more with the Queen of the Kingdom, you know? So it's not just a villain on their own, and also they have a wife that's faintly relevant, but not really. It very much felt like everybody was let down, both in the real world and in universe as well. This is such a corporate movie trying to hit so many quota boxes that is basically the defining feature of modern Disney movies, that the fact that this is a catastrophic failure is both emblematic of the state of Disney right now, and also oh so very deserved, because what the hell were you doing? Is this meant to have the actual original Disney characters that are the foundation of this company appearing in the movie as themselves? What are you doing with your Peter Pan reference in the near credit scene? I don't get it. This is such a stupid movie, and it's so laughable that they managed to get it this far through and then say, hey, look, it's celebrating 100 years. Look at how relying on the past we've become. I don't really think there is another Disney movie that felt more unfocused and awful in execution and pretty much every possible direction you could go to. And in fact, early days, I was actually kind of a defender of at least the visual aesthetic, but it really didn't do enough. Considering its rivals are the likes of Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mitchell's vs. Machines, and so many others doing this far more stylistic design, to come out at the end of it this bland is abhorrent, truly showing that originality and flourish from Disney is certainly dead. But hey, at least it was original. Because the next one up on the list isn't even that. Kind of, it is a mandated, official Disney ripoff of a movie. We're talking about the DreamWorks weird cousin. It's not Madagascar, it's The Wild. A movie that conceptually seems so outlandish and terrible, I didn't even realize it was a Disney movie until like a few months back. Look at it. It's trying to do photorealistic animals 20 years before it's an option. And it is so egregious too. This is clearly a DreamWorks ripoff, right? We know this. You can see the comparisons. Lion protagonist. There is not a hippo. There is a giraffe. They go to another land. Antics ensue, but with far less, again, stylistic choicing. Madagascar is one of the most slapstick-heavy animated franchises out there, and I think it's really impressive. I really love the comedy from that movie. Maybe I'm just a little bit frantic in the head, if you can't tell by this video alone yet. But on top of that, the characters are so much more flat, the visual aesthetic is just not there, and the story is just again, unfocused and weird. Now, the wild at least comes during a time where Disney is clearly trying stuff. It's not so crazy corporate, and it's clearly floundering with the Sonic the Hedgehog conundrum. And by that I mean it had a rocky transition from 2D to 3D. This was at a time when Disney were trying to find their feet as the animation industry they'd founded themselves on was completely changing beneath them. But this right here, this wasn't it. From the most generic lion story in existence of trying to do a roar, it comes out like a cat stock sound effect. They do it 4 times with the same cat sound effect, and then finally he magically does roar cool at the end, to just outright repeating the fact that they're doing another lion protagonist story and referencing themselves 10 years ago doing some of the lion antics. You've got an awkwardly outdated couple of characters falling into an arc about being basically a sex pest and rewarded for it. And then you just have some unfortunate parallels that really don't do the movie very good. Like casting Susan Eddie Izzard into a character that then gets platformed as the Great Him. You can't really predict that one though. Even though they were technically out in like the 90s, so maybe it should have been more predicted. Anyway, this movie for what it is at least looks visually nice for the time. You can see it's going for a look that's like, oh, this is impressive CGI. Not a great cartoon that I necessarily think we have to see. Maybe if the plotline was better, you could defend it. It's visually got a Disney budget, I would assume. But at the end of the day, up front and center, this is just a Disney-mandated ripoff, and it has none of the accolades and qualities to really justify it existing. It is a terrible example during a time when Disney was tumultuous. As if they haven't been tumultuous most of the time they've been around at this point. They're tumultuous right now as well. It's to the point I'm struggling to find more points to talk about this movie because I just keep thinking about Madagascar instead, the far superior version. And let's be honest, you probably watched that one more than you did this one. I didn't even know it existed as a kid. Doesn't have that Disney look, doesn't have that Disney flair, doesn't have that Disney seal of approval, and I'm sure Disney themselves want to forget about it too. So let's move on from one set of lions on to another. We're already there. Yes, the third worst Disney movie as far as I'm concerned in 3D is the most recent Mufasa the Lion King. And I'll tell you what, I can kind of say the same things as I said for The Wild. Visually, yeah, it looks nice. You can see the style they're going for. It's photorealistic animals of the time. Just a bit better this time. Now, the reason I think I put this movie so low is it's, again, during a time when Disney is the most corporate, quota, mandated, and lack of quality as they have been. But I think as well, it comes from a bit more of a personal gripe that this movie should have been good. I hate live-action Disney remakes as much as the next person, but I would love the idea of original live-action Disney remake sequels. If you're going to bring me back to the universe of Cinderella and then introduce new content on top of it, I would kind of be up for that. I could see it still being divisive, but at least I'd have, an inkling of respect for it. But if this is the kind of quality that we can expect from an original Disney remake sequel, God, the titles are already getting too long for me, then yeah, just chuck them all, because this is easily one of the worst original Disney movies I've seen. Only better than 2 others. It's not exactly an officially mandated ripoff, but it kinda is. Mufasa the Lion King showcases that the original creators of the original Lion King are no longer working at Disney or no longer have the ability to make something of that same quality. The song choices in this, though it is Lin-Manuel Miranda, I guess is too experimental, too weird, it insists upon itself, is what it does. It's so much being like, oh look, we're the most successful animated movie of all time. Let's just run with it. Of course we're going to make all the money. We don't even need to try. Or if we do try, we can do more experimental things. Yahoo. It's a call to reality. You might even actually argue, I just realized in putting this here, that it's not even an animated movie. It's live action. I'm going to count these movies as basically animated because look at them. They are basically animated. It's my list. I'm going to run with it. But yeah, when you actually go and dissect the actual qualities of Mufasa the Lion King, it's just so poorly done in so many directions as well. Like, you could see the fact that they were trying to bring in Timon and Pumbaa because they were the best bits that everyone likes. They're the fan favorite characters of the Lion King original, and I guess the remake too. Sure, you've got expensive cast members, might as well use them again. But then in having this format of, oh, we're in the present day to tell a story of the past, and then we're going to go back and forth, it just feels a little bit unfocused. All the originals are just unfocused. Well, this one at least has somewhat of an idea, it's just not executed well in any direction. I hate the fact that the lessons learned to the kid in the present day don't really come out enough in the final climax of the movie. It's just, you know? The reason I put this movie in particular so very low, only better than the likes of the rip-offs and the outright dumpster fire, is because I'm sure some people would probably mark this as a bit higher. It at least visually looks stunning, I guess. It's because this movie ruins the dream version of Disney I have in my head, you know? This, to me, is only evidence and proof that Disney don't know how to write good movies anymore. It's one thing to make a bunch of experimental, original movies that flop because of all sorts of extraneating circumstances you could and can't control, like doing The Wild, or Strange World, or Wish, I guess. But Mufasa, you had everything you need to make a good Mufasa movie. You are standing on the giant of the most successful animated movie of all time, and you can't make the next one good? That calls to a level of incompetence that is unfathomable for a company the size and success of Disney. It's that classic tale, isn't it? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The fact that Mufasa fell like this tells me that there is no hope for future Disney movies unless there is a giant reshuffle of cast and crew at this point. The cast are fine. Crew. I mean, sure, I'd like you to also hire actual voice actors and not just celebrities showing up as their voices, but I'm not going to die on that hill too badly. But where the hell are your writers, man? Is it because of the writers' strike? In which case, all the power to them, because, for God's sake, no one could write a good movie anymore. You're going to quickly notice as we go further up this list, we're going to go backwards in time. Overall, I think you might be starting to see a little bit of a theme. When it at least comes to the most recent Disney movies, I like them the least. Maybe it's because I've grown to become an actual somewhat film critic online, but also, do you not get that sense that, like, everything feels so bland and corporate now? Like, sometimes I think, oh, if I go back to my childhood movies, I only like them because I'm nostalgic for them, but then you actually rewatch them and you're like, no, movies used to be really good. Where's the secret sauce that's missing now that classic movies had and these modern ones don't? I'm sure there's a million theories, but Mufasa to me seems like the epitome of all of those missed opportunities and mishandling of an IP that should be the easiest, most successful super budget of all time. But hey, it doesn't matter anyway. You can still roll out a trailer saying, this is the most successful movie of this weekend, woo! And then completely ignore the Sonic 3 movie that came out at the same time and clearly trounced you in the box office early days as well. Sure, do what you want, Disney, but clearly you don't want to make a good movie. You know what? Let's cool the jets a little bit. No more getting angry about recent Disney. Let's get grumbly about mid-old Disney. We're now going back to a classic. A not exactly Disney mainline movie, but hey, it's my list. I want to run with the ones I particularly seen and have opinions on. So next up, we're handling Planes. Remember Planes? A knockoff, spin-off, rip-off kind of thing, not even made by the main Disney, and not even based off of main Disney either. That's Pixar. Either way, this movie is the kind of terrible movie that you like to see. You know what I mean? This is like what a sack of shit. It's not that bad, though. The thing I would label it more than anything as is just a bit bland. This movie is the Cars movie, but without any of the existential, personality-based pause in a rundown rural town, and entirely just the race. And also their planes. For those of you that haven't seen it, this entire movie is about racing planes. Even though you probably think that there'd be more room in making something about, like, commercial flights, or private jets, or a fire and rescue team. Who knows about that idea? You know, because generally that's what planes are more known for. This movie instead decides to just make it more cars, but in a different format. Brilliant cinema. And the end result of it is genuinely just a rip-off of Cars, doing its thing with a lot of the emotional weight taken out of it. In fact, when there is anything close to emotion in this movie, it's again a little outdated. A lot of it's about a Spanish plane flirting with a female plane until she says yes. This is your classic just sort of collection bin of a DVD you'd witness, and it's more opportunity to wonder how the hell does this universe work? Cars in its universe is strange enough. Why does the Planes universe go to New York and then show us the Twin Towers are missing? You know? This is the kind of ironic, backwards, terrible movies you love to watch. And, like, it's not dreadful. If you put a child in front of this, it doesn't actively hurt their brain. These movies, to me, are the kind that kind of hit that sweet spot of dopamine and disgust, and the kind that I love making terrible videos about. In fact, I have done. So in case you're not aware of our full breakdown of Planes 1, feel free to give that a look. Google it. Although I do remember, ironically enough, that video was, like, an absolute pain in the ass to produce. It took me, like, 3 days to write, and I was, like, grinding through the script. Apparently a very gloomy weekend. There was a lot of rain. Maybe it was that. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. This was again during a strange time at Disney during the early 2010s, where they had a side studio called Disney Toon Studio working on expanding all of the franchises and IPs they had. And though their movies are, kind of bad, kind of bland, I almost kind of wish that they were still around making stuff. Is that weird? Do I want... Oh, no, that is weird. I specifically said don't make crappy, skippable content. But this wasn't, like, that bad. It was just kind of bland. When I get on the ramble about, there shouldn't be terrible kids' movies, let's give our kids something, not biggest brain, but, to think about, Planes to me is kind of harmless in how simplistic it is. And this studio was the one that was responsible to those classic VHS sequels, so maybe in that sense it's good that they're not around anymore. But though I have very weird, high, ironic praises for a studio like that, at the end of the day, the movie they made is very much not memorable, and that's why it's this low down. We're gonna get to a lot of more terrible movies that are, pretty bad, but they're at least memorable. They're quotable, you can think about it a little bit more. The only things I really remember about the Planes movie is the romance, the fart joke at the beginning, and then the jokes that I've added on top in my own video dissecting it. And it's not a narcissism thing. I just think about 9/11 a lot. But also a classic, they're dead the whole time theory chucked in there for fun. The classics. This movie could never hope to surpass or even come close to the legacy of the original Cars movies. Hey, maybe it's better than Cars 2 at least. I don't know about that. Yeah, probably. But for what it is, it's Disney at a strange time making strange stuff. But boy, does it put a smile on my face. So moving on from number 1 to number 2, we're talking about a sequel, but not to Planes, to Wreck-It Ralph. Ralph Breaks the Internet. Now this I think grinds people's gears in different ways depending on who you ask. This to me was kind of the very notable start, the most obvious example of Disney doing just corporate crappy stuff. This is the most, hey look internet, it's the internet movie you've ever seen. And considering it's based on the Wreck-It Ralph franchise is honestly a real shame. Because the universe of the world is really fascinating of reanimating video game characters and having them do things. It's literally like a Pixar prompt. Instead of what if elements had emotions, it's now what if video game characters had emotions, which is pretty neat and cool. And the idea of expanding into the internet world has legs. But I mean, the execution of all of this is just not quite it. It's so jingly keys. Look, Amazon. You recognize Amazon. Look, Google. Oh, you recognize the Google guy? You don't. We made him up. But the concept of Googling, woohoo. It's funny as well, because when I first saw this in cinemas, I didn't absolutely hate it. But I think it's because I reached a point where I was able to switch off that part in my brain, and I was able to just take on the jingling keys. Because there is room for decent enough ideas in there. This movie isn't entirely a surface level, hey look at that, hey look at that. At the very core of it, there is this element of not holding back your friends and supporting them even when they choose to do something that you disagree with or that has you have to take off the reins. The idea that Vanellope finds a driving game that is more their style and then chooses to go out to it has some nice nuance to it, and the characters are written well enough that they do start to explore that idea. Add on the fact that the final big boss is like a big thing made out of a bunch of little things that seems kind of generic and basic, but is also like the representation of being overly possessive and clingy and don't leave me, had something going for it that I think is like worth mentioning, highlighting, praising a little bit. And it certainly could even go to the point of opening up a conversation afterwards. I happen to know someone whose mum really hated this movie because of reasons. And though we never really resolved the emotional elements in real life about it, it is at least something that would be worth talking about. Talking about like, what were the themes of that? Where does this mean? What is the right thing to do? Do you understand why Ralph felt like this? What should Vanellope have done here and that? I don't know. To me, This is kind of what I think kids' movies should be for. Maybe this is me putting too much of my own personal thoughts in. What am I talking about? This is a tier list. This is all my personal thoughts. The idea of, like, having a movie that opens conversation that you can then talk to and dissect with them afterwards, to me, is the best kind of kids' movie. And this has an element of that in there. And then it has the Disney section, where they have Star Wars troopers and Groot's there. And they have a scene surrounded by princesses. And it's just a bit... Hey, look at me. I own the only IP. Give us money. And, like, of course they would do that. They were at the very height of their Marvel phase over on that side of things. But, God, it just feels a little bit soulless. It weirdly has a bit of soul in it, but then the rest of it is just so mandated and a bit... It insists upon itself, crumbling over its own legacy, facade, and size. Whilst at the same time, I kind of think there could have been potential with what they did do. Less of the Amazon, less of the, wow, look at all these brands we like. We love brands. Are you a fan of brands? Brand! But the idea of, like, Vanellope integrating with the other princesses, again, as well, they talk about femininity in there, which is, you know, nice, theme, nuance, worth talking about to your child afterwards. And I think maybe they could have done more of a plot with the other princesses getting involved. That could have been interesting to see. Kind of like a Trek the Third of all things. That's where my brain goes for that. Apparently, I crave the worst Shrek movie. But at the same time, you know, the concept's there, the emotional soul is somewhat in there, but it's just so painted over in quota, is the best way I can describe it, that I just... Yeah, it's a pretty terrible movie. And the more you think about it after the fact that it's over, the more you can come to that conclusion. I just hope someone found a use out of it, being able to open up about those nuances to somebody. Not that person's mother, though. They didn't understand that it's good to let people go. So moving on up the ranks, and we're still in terrible territory. There's a lot of bad Disney movies. They're not the kings of animation. We have the Sonic Adventure 1 of Disney movies. It is Chicken Little. Oh, look at this thing. The first attempt over into 3D animation, and it ain't good. Now, visually, it's actually not too bad. You can tell that there's a budget behind it. There's somewhat of a style in there. It's not the most appealing style. And the color palette sometimes gets a little bit funky and weird. But the plot line, the characters, oh, the characters. When the final result of your movie is being known as the one having the worst dad in animated movies of all time, I mean, that's really saying something. I think Buck Cluck alone kind of ruins this movie, because this was so frustrating to watch. Take it from me, I was 8, maybe 9 years old when this movie came out in 2005, I believe. Oh, sorry, 2006. I might have been 10. And I remember feeling so frustrated about this plotline because, like, you feel as weak and undermined as your main Chicken Little guy. What kind of name is Chicken Little anyway? The name choices alone show how bad this writing is. Something about this movie just removes all dopamine when watching it, unless you enjoy things ironically after the fact 20 years later. And then beyond just the incredibly unsupportive father figure that you have to then trawl your way through this whole time, add on the repetitive storyline that you can tell is going to be like The Boy That Cried Wolf, but also you have to individually experience every repeat of the same story beat in a way that's like, it's like you're being gaslit yourself into believing it's not real. Like, you genuinely feel like you're being taken on a ride on this movie, as if you are a weirdo idiot like the protagonist for watching this movie so long. And then when it does finally kick off, it happens halfway through the movie, and it feels like the plotline's already ended. We go through this whole arc of Chicken Little as a baseball player, again, as well, for some reason. Very American thing. British me does not really get it. And then only after that, after we've come to like a semblance of a, okay, finally we've gotten through this horrendous feeling that this movie gives my gut for some reason, then it just continues on with a whole different plotline about the actual sky and the aliens. And then it's like, oh, there they are, but also it's a bit... I don't know, something about the execution of it all is just a bit... You then, of course, got all sorts of other elements that are pretty outdated in a lot of ways, in a pretty big way. You got another character that doesn't speak, which is kind of cool, kind of smart. It doesn't help this movie, though, in any way. It doesn't really make things that much better. And really, the whole thing just kind of comes off as a bit of a fever dream once it's done. The delivery on the voice acting's a weird in a lot of places. The aesthetic never really gets comfortable with you, I find. Like, something about the way the dogs move in this movie, like the gym teacher. I don't know, there's something uncanny about it. With it being Disney's first, it just sort of fumbles and flobbles around. And while there's not as much emotional swing successes in it as maybe the likes of Ralph Breaks the Internet, at the very least, it's not so pasted over in quota and corporateness, it's just a bit confused. And the other thing is it is surprisingly quotable. The memes that came out of this movie were far and few between, but there's a couple, you know. You have to, and all that. And I'm sure there's others, but maybe that's it, because I've forgotten all the rest. Either way, at the very least, I can see this movie as one that I'm a little bit, like, empathetic for, in the fact that you can tell it's a struggle, and they slapped out something to try and go against their rivals. It's not actively deserving of its negativity, it's just a poor run. It's no Mufasa, it's no The Wild, and it's no Wish, you know? It's not actively, I wish bad on this movie. And, you know, as a kid, I remember really getting confused on knowing which animation studio was which, and I can understand myself why now. With Disney making all of these vastly different visual aesthetics, no wonder I couldn't tell which was Disney and what wasn't, especially when it came to the non-musical ones. Because this movie, I feel, looks like no other movie, and then they didn't really come back to it that much again. Good, to be honest, good. Alongside the fact that this movie feels like a long drool of gaslighting, especially for the first half, I also feel like it just sort of blinks and you miss it, you know? I feel like once the alien exists, we immediately blink and we're at like the end of the world element again. This movie in a lot of ways is memorable in the fact that it's got some nice, ironic meme quotes you can take out of it. Presumably. And maybe some of the jokes are nice to see out of context. But then on the other side of it, it's so unmemorable that I kind of forget, or I try to forget it as much as possible. I think it might be because so many scenes are repeat scenes, so it feels long when you're watching it because you're watching it again. And then when you remember back to it, you combine all those scenes together and it's like, oh yeah, there was a baseball scene, a look at the sky scene, an alien chase scene, the apocalypse scene. Add in a bad father and a slightly better father, and there you go. There's all 6 or 7 scenes of Chicken Little. And also the cinema at the end with a buff Chicken Little that ran off and made its own video game. Disney was going through something in 2006, notably. But not as much as what they were going through 13 years later, as 2019, we got Frozen 2. This is what I'm saying, man. Disney is in tumultuous times more than they're not. This movie, I feel like, has a little bit of the Mufasa syndrome combined with a Chicken Little syndrome, in that they have the quota to make a sequel based on something really successful, and they've got a lot of red tape that they're trying to cover, whilst at the same time, they don't really have a clue what they're doing, and they're struggling, and it's difficult to do, and they're just grinding their way through it. Even just hearing some of the behind the scenes around this movie, you can tell it was just absolutely just a dumpster fire behind the scenes. And the final result is at least better than it sounds like it was going to be. But at the same time, God, this sequel just lost everything. The wind out of its sails for sure. Now, to be fair, I can kind of empathize with them. How on earth do you make a sequel to the most financially successful Disney movie of recent years? I don't know. What would I have done? But the fact remains, this movie ends up being far less memorable than its original, and the songs just don't pick it up. The visuals are faintly better than the original, and I'm sure they put all sorts of processing power into that, but at this point you start to see the characters in a different lens, and it feels like they're overstaying their welcome. It's no longer that every single line they say is absolute gold in a surprising way that sets them off for virality. It's just a bit like, more of the same, and not that well done. Frozen 2, I think, despite being a far less memorable movie than maybe even the likes of Chicken Little and Ralph Breaks the Internet, I think at least looks a good bit palatable. You can see the plotline they're going for, and even though it's not grandiose and you're not really like got that much of a heart flutter moment of, Elsa's singing with her mother now through the icicle void holograms, it at least does a job of telling the story it wants to tell. It's just not a very good story. Or at least it's a story that's not as well executed as it could be. You got a little lizard guy, you got the 4 elements in the universe. The very fact that one of the biggest highlights of this movie is your comic relief character telling the events of the first movie does kind of say a lot, but this movie feels more like one super restricted from quota and doubtful concerns than it is actual corporate, this is just going too far in the wrong direction. But also, it is very much a mandated sequel relatively quickly, and they have already made the existence of Frozen 3 and 4 a thing. You may be aware of Frozen 3 from the latest D23, but also Frozen 4 is absolutely being made. They're gonna run this damn franchise into the ground. Now, to be honest, I haven't seen this movie since it came out in cinemas, so maybe that's the reason I particularly find it unmemorable. But also, I haven't seen much discussion surrounding Frozen 2 since it came out. This movie felt like one that just went out into the zeitgeist. We made somewhat memes about it, hoping to hop onto the next big thing, and then it just didn't reach expectations. And with these movies coming out so far apart from a child's perspective, I mean, the kids that watched the first movie and went mad are probably long going to be in their 20s by the time this third one comes out, so maybe they're already losing steam in that front. At the very least, I'm not looking forward to 3 and 4, considering it's going to be the super corporate recent Disney version that's coming out of them. But this one, yeah, it had ideas, it'd be nice. I don't think they did a very good job. I can't even remember if there's a villain in this damn movie. There's rivaling villages? Great, let's make a movie based on the worst Avatar The Last Airbender episode, that'll go great. I think overall, this movie shows that Disney didn't quite nail what it was that made the magic of the first one, if they even knew what it was in the first place. Do we even know what it was in the first place? You just need damn good songs, and apparently it's not really in the cards. In fact, I believe it was the Frozen songwriters that made the Moana 2 songs, so it's really just, the best times were in the past. You can only make a great thing once. I don't know what the conclusion is there, but I find this movie to be very unmemorable. But hey, stick it in front of your kids. It'll entertain them. Less nuance to talk about, though. What a shame. But let's move on from Frozen 2 and talk about the other 2019 Disney movie. Apparently, this specific era is mid to low tier. I want to talk about the Lion King remake now. Again, technically not animated in the sense that they want to say it's live action. It ain't. I'm counting it as part of the 3D animated movies. Now, this one here is an interesting example and is why I put it so high on the terrible movies, because it's just not original, but the original story is good. And the fact of the matter remains that the main, broad, most generic, easiest audience do really enjoy this movie, so maybe it has some accolades. Visually, it functions well. The writing is good because it's somebody else's writing work. The changes they made, I'm not actually that crazy about either. And really anything that goes away from the norm only hacks to negatively affect the movie. It really makes me feel like sometimes we were robbed by the fact of, why didn't they make the Mufasa movie 2D? Then I think there'd be actually some real room for... Anyway, no, that should be for the earlier segment that I'm not going to repeat. Seriously, Disney, if they got on that, if they make a third Lion King movie and they make it the old school 2D way, I'd be really curious to see the results of that. But also, they clearly can't write original for crap anyway, so instead we get generic, repeated, at least not line for line, but pretty naff. This movie, I think, is quite undoubtedly still inferior to the original Lion King, but for what it's trying to do, it succeeded. It made way too much money, and it shoved in all the more celebrity casted voice actors as they could as they went. This movie, when I watched it in cinemas, I just went, yeah, that's kind of it. It would be wrong to say that this movie is unmemorable because it was being shoved in our faces so much that it's certainly memorable. You know what it looks like. You remember the beats. But it's kind of because it's just harping on that old nostalgia thing. When all of the new elements you brought to this movie don't really elevate the movie beyond just a visual aesthetic, it's not really a good movie by any means. It's just a terrible rip-off of its own content. How many times has Lion King been ripped off now? Just by Disney alone. They ripped themselves off with The Wild, then they ripped themselves off with a sequel, now they ripped themselves off with a live-action remake. Impressive, honestly. I'm genuinely very impressed by that. But while the visual art style is nice, the thing that really elevates a movie for me is, of course, that emotional core. Any nuance is great, but any emotion is wonderful. And when you got a visual art style that's just photorealistic, high-end technology, here it looks real, ain't that cool, you lose that expressionism that at least Mufasa dipped into a little bit more functionally. This just looks stiff. It's an interesting case study, the kind of movie you would like to send back 100 years in time to be like, wow, look at this. Good writing and also a unique visual style that people 100 years ago could have never imagined existing so well. But when it comes to a list of all the Disney movies they've made and all sorts of classics that there are in the future, yeah, this ain't really. It's hard to really talk about this movie in the context of this list because any praises I have are praises for a different movie and any negatives I have aren't really much on top of this movie. There isn't much more to it. There's only like a 5% slice of originality on top. And honestly, I really couldn't give a fuss about this damn movie. I made a couple videos about it in the past, but I don't even think I'm motivated to make a terrible or amazing about it because I kind of don't know where to put it. It functions, it does well, It satisfies a very basic core audience that either haven't seen the original story before or just don't care and want to see lions being lions, or looking like they are, that this is such a non-movie in any other case. Really, it's just such an injustice that this is the most financially successful 3D animated Disney movie. These titles are really getting too long. Because this movie has no originality and all just the, I don't know, it doesn't even feel like art that they're pushing the boundaries of CGI. It just feels like corporate remakes at a time when Disney are making all the live action remakes. It just wasn't worth it, and they clearly wasted the potential in the sequel. Combining this with an original story should have really been the best case scenario, but though 2019 Disney is clearly struggling with the weight of their prior projects, mid-2020s Disney is somehow all the worst. Yeah, I really don't have anything more to say about it. Seth Rogen, yay, nay? I don't really care. So let's move on to maybe a controversial pick? I don't know. Now we're starting to get into... No, it's still terrible territory, but kind of terrible territory that I have more empathetic vibes for. Somehow, only now do we reach the real latest mainline Disney movie. Moana 2. Better than Lion King remake? It's a take. Moana 2 is so clearly just a terrible sequel in a lot of ways, in the fact that it's just a DVD sequel in the modern age. A Disney Plus series. A modern age, adapted into a movie. For some reason. And with it comes all of the expansions to the Moana universe, done very poorly. The characters have no room for actual character development. It feels like a series quota bait of, oh, we have to have all these characters involved, so here, chuck in a cast that weren't really needed the first time. There has to be an even younger main little girl for the really main little girls that are watching this on Disney+. Every TV series apparently needs it now, because the protagonist is not protagonist enough. You gotta add stakes in there that don't really make sense, because you're like, oh, what if Moana dies? She needs help. But she has a literal god water thing on her side, so she's not gonna die. She's done it before in the first movie. She's gonna spend all the time padding out things that aren't really worth it. It's gonna take her 72 working days to get off the island after being told 3 or 4 separate times to leave the island and start your adventure. And then once the adventure actually begins, it's such a monster of the week episodic format with the coconut and the clam, and then a portal appears that skips right to the end anyway. It's so poorly adapted from clearly what is probably a low quality series in the first place. Considering we're coming off of the accolades of Mufasa, where they can't make original sequels even if they actually had the resources to take this presumably terrible series, considering the final outcome, it certainly feels like it was doomed from the start, and then warping it into a movie format, a 90-minute brief stint, is just so terrible. This is a terrible sequel through and through that functionally does nothing that it's trying to do well, and the only things good about it is conceptualizing the ideas rather than what they actually ran with. They ruined the crab. It actively makes the franchise as a whole look worse, and they've turned it into a post-credits Marvel Cinematic Universe sequence in 2024. 5! It's the latest one. 5! Oh no, it was still 2024. It was like November, December. It blurs in my head. But, I have a slight empathetic twinge for Moana 2 for the simple fact that I kind of feel like it almost sort of has potential. In my head, it does anyway. To me, the very fact that this does actually expand the universe of Moana makes me want to say, oh well, it at least did something. Don't watch the actual final results of what it actually did. You don't really need to see that. But you can run around with what they did expand going forwards, because some of the ideas I don't totally hate. Having a little coconut guy who was the villain but then has his own little thing going on and then joins the crew. I like him. Give him more screen time, please. I know he doesn't talk, but he was like the best part of the movie. The giant clam monster as well, I really enjoy. Having these big titan monsters in the world of Moana that we clearly haven't seen much of beyond a giant crab and a volcano lady is really fascinating to see explored. I don't know if it's based on different Polynesian mythos or anything, and presumably considering this is a sequel that has no real good qualities to it, I would assume not. But still, I was kind of enthralled to see it, and maybe if it did have a full episode length of time put to it, although I feel like we did spend like a good 20 minutes with the damn thing, it could have been good. There are additions that I am not a big fan of. The bogey slinging blobfish is like a very tired, done joke that I was not very impressed by. And of course, introducing teleporting portals to the world just completely ruins the entire mythos of Moana as a big oceanic universe. So that's an absolute disaster on that end. But then once it comes to its ending and you start to see some of the third sequel bait that they're setting down, there are some really interesting directions that Moana 2 is thinking about taking things that I'm really on board with. The fact that Moana is rewarded with demigod powers after having these big 2 wins and clearly being bestowed this ability is really, really cool. Fascinating. And the idea that it was only minimal tattooing, was at first I just thought a very Disney blanket, Disney princess thing. But then if you think about it, it could expand in a further way where she gains more tattoos, the more she does more good for her entire tribe and humanity as a whole. Kind of like Far Cry 3 of all things. The more you level up in that game, the bigger tattoos you get. A weird dig for a reference, but I really, really liked that. Whilst at the same time, you then have Maui here, who loses his demigod powers, and then immediately gets them again. Why? What are you doing? You really could have had a fun idea of taking Maui losing their demigod powers that they've clearly relied on the entire time against a now demigod Moana. That sounds like a cool idea that we're not getting till Moana 3 and not getting at all because Maui got his tattoos straight away. Like not so much layers and depth, but the intensity of any story beat is so shallow in this movie that they show a million expansions and then dip their toes slightly into all of them. It's just so functionally a terrible original movie by Disney again. Even when you have a full TV series worth of stuff, they don't split it up into chunks and be like, here's where we can take it long term. No, they just cram it all together, shove it out, and say, hey, the most successful Disney movie on Disney Plus, you'll take it now that it's a crappy sequel, right? It's the exact same mythos as Mufasa. It's modern Disney corporate slapped together with no quality, and where the bloody hell are the writers again? Now that we're back in the age of 2024, I'm back on the same damn rambles. It's maddening how Disney can't make a functioning movie. Originals, they flop, and musicals, they're terrible. I like Moana 2 in the fact of I like imagining what Moana 2 could do. If I think about over-expanding some character developments for each of the individual characters, maybe I could enjoy them. And only because it's more of one of the better Disney movies do I really like this, because it only slightly tarnishes the accolades of the original. It expands the universe in a boring, unsatisfying way, and that's really its biggest red flag. But at the same time, when thinking about where the franchise can go further beyond Moana 2 now, there are some red flags chucked in there that's only going to make things worse. Introducing portals is going to ruin the future movies as well. You don't even see the damn villain in this movie. You see a storm that the villain is, manifesting? He's not even there. How do you make a movie without the movie's, integral parts? You're too busy shoveling in all of these strange micro ideas and not expanding them, but you don't even give us a damn villain? You just give us a creepy lady who appears in the middle and then appears in the post-credits. I don't understand who mandated all of these strange choices. Is there no, adaptive manager? Someone needs to learn how to make a damn movie, because whoever the hell's in charge in Disney now are just ruining all of it. Is it corporate me-angling, making it too far, warped into something that's no longer the original product? Sure. Why did they keep some elements and get rid of others? It's such a baffling idea of how did they twice in the same year ruin a movie's original premise by making a terrible original sequel. At least this time it was meant to be straight to DVD, so the quality is faintly explained there, but these are your most successful animated movies, and Disney are just flubbing it. It's maddening how they've gotten this far. And the more I think about Moana, the lower it goes on this list, just because it's just so maddening all the mistakes they made along the way. And though I really want to be kind of on board with Moana because I like some of the expansions they bring, at the end of the day, the storyline we actually got, with a faintly better visual aesthetic that I can barely tell the difference of, just makes it all fall apart. The ensemble is getting too bloated. Maui is just becoming a collection of catchphrases. The songs were absolutely god-awful, as if they forgot the character of Moana in the first place, and then couldn't replace it with anything close to memorable. Again, a Mufasa problem there. And then even with, like, the afterlife, that's getting confusing now. Anyone can visit Moana. Grandma's gonna be just a recurring figure to hug whenever she feels like it. And also, it's the ancestors themselves that bestow Moana with the tattooed demigod powers. So why didn't they do that at the beginning if they're the ones that can give it away? Like, it's... It's a second example of Disney ruining their biggest successes. It's watching a company sabotage itself, at least in quality, before our very eyes. Doing stuff like this is kind of what killed Blue Sky Studios. You're losing your trust in your audience. And if enough people feel like you've lost some sort of seal of quality, where are the next 5 years going to go for you, man? Presumably Disney's too big to fail, but I guess we'll only see the results of that further into the future. Bolt. Bolt is next. Is it a surprise to hear it so high up? Now this movie was the very first lie directly to our faces that we felt as a kid, right? You watch the trailers for Bolt, you think it's about a superpowered dog. That's cool. Before the era of superheroes and we have a superpowered dog, that's a great premise for a storyline, and I'm surprised we haven't seen that much beyond Super Pets. Then you come to find you actually watch the damn movie, and the marketing teams were slapping together whatever the hell they could, because it's about an actor dog pretending to be a superhero that doesn't realize they're not a superhero. It's Toy Story, but in a dog. And the resulting story you get is a way inferior one to the thought you were gonna get based off the trailers. To me, this movie is just complete neutral. It is completely without surface. Alright, dog is not that powerful, does something faintly heroic, not as heroic as they want to be, but still grows as a person, on the run. There's a hamster in a bowl, there is a cat, Miley Cyrus. It's not to say that this movie is boring, but to me it kind of is boring, especially when you put it against the hype and expectations you had for this movie. It's only just a little bit, nah. Now again, this movie came out in that tumultuous time for Disney. It's either the tumultuous time is now, the tumultuous time is 2019, or the tumultuous time is when they were first doing animation. This is 2008. Oh, and it's interesting to see, actually, just looking at the critics' scores, because I wasn't paying attention back in 2008, I was 12. Apparently, it's a 90% by critics, but 74% by audiences. And that really says something when critics think, oh yeah, it's a well-put-together movie, and your audience is a bit like, yeah, it wasn't that great, you know? I think I'm more on the audience side of this, because I was more of an audience member when I watched this. It's just not the movie I wanted it to be, and though it might put itself together pretty neatly, I certainly wouldn't say it's a terrible movie, but nobody really talks about this movie anymore. It's kind of gotten lost in the zeitgeist, it's not memorable, and nobody really cares that much about it anymore. There's a couple shots you might remember, barking and it setting off an earthquake against a bunch of military vehicles, but like, I don't know, I don't care, I don't have to win for this. This is why I put it at like the true neutral. I think it's a pretty well put together movie, the development is clearly there, the characters have bits. Actually, the thing that's freshest in my mind is a superpowered hamster short that they made, which is crazy and funky, and it's kind of sweet in a way that it's old school Disney. It's Disney before they found the magic of Tangled and Frozen, so it's very much of its own era. It's Disney finding their feet in the 3D format, but I remember as a kid always being a bit like, I've seen it now. Mom, don't put it on again. Let's not buy the DVD VHS. I don't want to watch it anymore. Actually, I was 12, so I probably wasn't thinking about that in general anymore, so maybe that's why I didn't watch it on VHS. It's already 2008. But putting it against the likes of WALL-E at the same year, it's just a no-brainer. Not that Pixar was a rival then, but you get the same idea. The very fact that I'm still talking about Bolt now, I expect you're probably feeling a little bit bored at this part of the video, because it's like, do you have big opinions about Bolt? I don't. I'll just say it outright. And weirdly enough, the only real controversial part of this list is the movies I haven't mentioned yet, seemingly not being worse than Bolt, perhaps. So let's move on to some of those more dramatic choices, the movies you might think are terrible, and I'm saying are not, the ones that I actually have a surprising amount of defensiveness for. And so, getting right to that, let's talk about Disney's Strange World. Yeah. Hey there, thank you for made it to the halfway mark of this tier list video. Come along and subscribe if you're interested in more tier lists. I'm probably going to do more. I've made a couple briefly in the past, thought they flopped, stopped, and then realized they picked up in the long term. So we're back again. Give us suggestions of other lists you'd like to see us cover. Otherwise, I'll let you get back to the rest of this very long video of ranking every Disney 3D animated movie. Alright then. Yeah. I like this movie. I don't think it's a brilliant masterpiece by any means, and putting it above Bolt might be controversial here, but I think it's okay. More so in the sense of I like the idea of Strange World than I actually like Strange World. It's a Moana 2 problem, except instead of being a sequel on top of a very financially successful movie, this is step one original movie, and I kind of want to respect original Disney movies more, because clearly those are the things that we want to see more of when you think about it. We're sick of remakes and sequels and IP bait, so to see an original story is refreshing. And this one comes from 2022 Disney, which is right before the end times. This movie was not that well liked, 66% from audiences, 77% from critics, and I agree. When I watch this movie, I am only enjoying it because my head is in the clouds the whole time. I love the beginning of this movie. I like the reveal at the end of this movie. I don't remember the bit in the middle, and that's why it's only a vaguely okay movie. I really love the world of Strange World. Both the world part and the strange world part of Strange World. You know what I'm saying? Now, this may be because during 2022, I saw like a viral animation of a solar punk farm aesthetic that I fell head over heels for. This sort of optimistic futurism of combining solar-powered futuristic equipment with, you know, cultivative farming stuff. And the world of Strange World, the world part, the stuff on the surface, is fully that. There's a really nice environmental green tone to this movie that, like, I find really, really fascinating. In the same way as kind of Treasure Planet in a weird way. Do I have Treasure Planet on this list? And though the characters are kind of simplistic and basic in a lot of ways, I was kind of head over heels for them early on to be like, yeah, all right, I like the world you live in. I like the way you archetype yourself. I want to see more of this. It kind of gave me, in a weird way, a sort of Studio Ghibli vibe. You know how they sort of pay a little extra attention to very small details and farming and like the sort of slice of life element, cooking with an animated fire or something? I got a weird cozy vibe from looking at the early parts in this movie, and it's the kind of thing I would like to see expanded more because that universe is really interesting. The story then goes into this whole underworld area, which is fascinating in its own right. I like that to a certain extent. They introduced this blobby character. Again, Disney and new characters. Sometimes they're wins, sometimes they're not. Sometimes I like the coconut, sometimes I think the fish doesn't help. The blob ain't that great either. But at least it's a faintly interesting idea and certainly hits the theme of, you know, what it's going to be. But this whole underworld element, I think, is cool, fascinating. Kind of wish they went in a slightly different direction with it. Maybe. We'll see. The thing that really thread lines through this whole movie, the thing they really want to care about is just generational problems. And that's very done, even by Disney, recently before this. And that stuff I wasn't really crazy about in any degree. I know a lot of people as well got up in arms on the more LGBT elements that crackle beyond the surface of this movie. Get a life. All of these Disney characters, and you're finally going to get upset because one of them doesn't fully, ultimately represent you. Very weird hill to die on. But while the plot line I really ain't crazy on board with, like, they sort of take it in interesting directions and they clearly go with the emotion of it, but it's just a bit meh, a bit generic, a bit safe. The world is the part that's most fascinating to me, especially once they come to the ending stuff, where they come to reveal that this strange world is so strange because it's one colossal giant being of a creature that they've accidentally been hurting this whole time. Very classic eco-friendly green climate change thing, but also makes sense with the solar punk themes at the start, I guess. Even though it sort of went in the wrong direction. And I think that's a really fascinating world to bounce off of. It's again why I sort of praise some of the elements of Moana 2. Again, giant colossal titan crab thing. It's basically the same idea. Disney really liked it, and apparently the audiences hate it every time they try it, which is a shame because I really, really like it. But then the story they try and tell around it just kind of flubs along the way. Like they go and learn, oh, we shouldn't cultivate our fields with this thing. It hurts the planet creature that we're on the backs of. But then also they just kind of cut to that happy ending where they've stopped that and they make a statue out of the main guy instead of, like, you know, that surely being a point of contention somewhere along the way. But when I watch this movie, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they did this? Oh, I want to see how they do this. This is nice. This is great. This is cool. If anything, I kind of want this movie without these exact set of characters. Set something in the same universe. Expand this universe. I want to defend this because it's an okay world that I'm fascinated by. Really, I just want the concept art book, apparently, and then I just want to run off in my own little head about it. At the very least, in my mind, it's very memorable for the big twist it tries to spin out and the really nice aesthetic it has early on. And for that, it's better than all of these terrible, terrible movies and at least it's not staining the franchise of something that already exists. It's nice to see Disney make something original, and though I'm a bit more on board with it compared to the likes of Wish and Bolt, at the end of the day, it's still not a complete win for Disney and originals, and when it comes to originals, Disney just doesn't have the writers for it yet. Ah well. But they're not all complete failures. The next one is another recent-ish Disney original, that now we're getting into good territory, maybe even great. We're beyond neutral, we're beyond okay. Now it's time to talk about Raya and the Last Dragon. And my biggest complaint for this movie back in the day, I made a review on this back when it came out in, what year was that now? 2021, apparently. My biggest complaint was that it was only 90 minutes long. Okay, 107, but basically the same idea. And nowadays, I'm not so much gonna die on that hill. Movies are an hour and a half for some reason. We're just going that way. It's just the way of the land. But I do think it does this movie an injustice. I gotta have a lot of the same ideas as Strange World. I like the world, the universe, the expansion and premise. Really, really nice and cool. The downside is the lack of screen time the whole movie gets. This is clearly meant to be one big globe-trotting adventure as Raya goes through all of these different creeks and crooks of this dragon river in order to find the last dragon, do this, that, and the other, combine the kingdoms, whatever. But it all skims by so fast that it feels unsatisfying, that it just blinks in every direction. There's all these different cultures and worlds we expand as we see all the different countries and tribes, and it's just too quick. It's too much. This would have been nice as a series. I want to see reverse the Moana 2 thing, or at least give us a sequel that expands in some direction. This movie, I feel, had good potential, and it does its things right. It hits the beats that it wants to hit in a nice enough way, Awkwafina Dragon included, but it just, to me, doesn't hit the dopamine in the way it could do, because it's just a bit too tippy toes. At the same time, I'm very on board with more Raya and the Last Dragon. Some of the things they introduce is really, really cool. I love the giant armadillo. It's been so long I forgot what the thing's called. I love the giant pet monster that Raya has. It's really, nice visually to see. Also, yes, the visual art style is nice there too. And though I know a lot of people were a little bit more grumbly about this movie, I'm a little bit more on the defending side to it. It is Awkwafina Dragon up front and center, which I kind of feel like dates this movie in a weird way. Having such a relevant pop culture celebrity in the front and center, I feel does hurt your movie in the long term. Kind of like having Tom Holland and Chris Pratt in Onward. It's the same kind of thing. Like, not that they're cancelled yet, but it's like, it takes you out of the movie. It's going back to what I said earlier in the script. Putting in celebrities into voice acting roles where they're not even voice acting, they're just being themselves, I think does do movies an injustice. But it's a corporate thing. It's a commercial thing. It's selling to the big, broad audience that doesn't care about these things. Sure, whatever. But I really liked it. And the story it told, yeah, pleasant, survivable. You can see where it was going for more of a emotive nuance with the two main rival characters going up against each other. And I think there was more they could have done there as well. It felt quite simplistic, and maybe that's what they were going for. Disney wanted at this time to just do a relatively safe original movie, which is why it only really comes out as good, but I think this has the potential to be really great. I think in this section of the Disney movie tier list, I just want to see the concept art. I want to see all the behind the scenes and just gather the ideas behind the movies, as opposed to actually enjoying the movies as much themselves. But at the very least, it shows here that the Disney concept workers certainly are onto something good, because I just really like the world here. It's just always the writers either being crushed for time or, there's a few jokes in here that are kind of generic and basic that I'm not crazy on. Beyond that though, I kind of struggle to say more about Raya and the Last Dragon, other than I want more. It doesn't hit its full potential. Whether or not Disney will actually care about this movie in the lens of a sequel, I'm doubtful. I don't think Disney's that sequel happy. I feel like they're quite defensive on their franchises. They'd much rather drop something that doesn't make super crazy money straight away, but maybe Disney Plus numbers are good. I don't think I've heard anything about that with Raya though. It's a shame. It was just a small little project off the side that I wish could have had more, but I guess it just falls flat under the corporate machine, gunning out the rest every year, or half a year. Ah well, maybe it's only me that's raving about this movie in the first place anyway. But hey, at least we're in the good territory. Let's talk about a great movie, shall we? Kind of, yeah, I'd say so. Maybe not, my lights just died. Let's talk about Big Hero 6. I think we can officially say that we're no longer talking about the absolute terrible or even neutral Disney movies. Big Hero 6? Yeah, it's pretty good. It's kind of the Disney mainline answer to doing a superhero movie, even though and the actual superpowers, they're based in science, it's a nice spin on it, and there's a nice element of creativity there. I really like the particle robot machine and also the chemistry ladle. Like, it's nice world building and it's interesting. Add on the fact that they actually have a proper tie-in universe with Stan Lee, and it's all a good little bit of fun. And I think I remember hearing back at that time, in like 2015, I think this is now, maybe 2014, that a lot of people even said that this was their favorite Disney movie. Now, to be fair, that might be a little bit of recency bias, and it does cover a good lot of standard cliches in there. I mean, like the villain, for example, swapping out as being, oh, it's a subversion. Kind of makes it non-subversive in its own way. But I think for like being a decent enough Disney movie, not maybe their absolute masterpiece magnum opus, but a pretty damn good stint, is a good description for Big Hero 6. I'm a fairly big fan of it. And it's got the emotional weight behind it, which I'm always hoping for in an animated movie. With the whole element of the elder brother, it's very, very nice. All the while giving us a very nice, cartoony, squishy protagonist robot hero in Baymax to be very classically Disney. The world is nice and interesting, being a mix of San Francisco and Tokyo to make San Fransokyo. Terrible name of a city. I hate a city with the name Soak in the middle of it. I don't think that sounds like a very nice place to live. If anything, that should be British. We're always soaked here. But yeah, for what it is, I think it's fairly decent. Whilst at the same time, when you look at it now, a few years later on, and you see it in the context of the rest of the era it's in, it does seem fairly safe and standard and generic, you know? This was at a height of superhero movies, so Disney made a superhero movie. I remember the pop culture song number that's like the main theme of this movie, and it's like, alright. I think to me, this is kind of like the quintessential standard modern Disney movie if they were functional, if they were good. It's kind of all downhill from here, clearly, based on the bottom of this tier list. But I think for being a non-boundary breaking masterpiece of an original story, yeah, it does the job. Maybe this is only a neutral okay, not so much a good or a great. But whilst Raya and the Last Dragon was too short to really sink its teeth into, the runtime of this movie, I think, is longer. It feels like it. I don't know, it's an hour and 48 as well. Somehow it just feels more compact, probably because it's more of a personal story and you don't really travel around the entire world in 90 minutes. And it just doesn't have the same pitfalls or misrepresentation of expectations as maybe Strange World and Bolt had, making this probably the superior original movie from Disney. All the while, at the same time, they never really made a sequel of this movie just yet, and will they? Are we gonna get Big Hero 7? Big Hero 12? 6 times 2? I don't know. There was a Baymax short series, which I quite enjoyed. It was very nice and personal, and I guess that's it. It's just sort of quaint and small scale, which maybe is what Disney would be better at doing. Telling more emotive, swaying stories as opposed to these big, ginormous trot adventures every 2 years. Either way, Big Hero 6 ticks all the boxes in a nice, standard, classical way. A modern Disney classic, maybe. Is that too high to say? But if we're talking about real modern Disney classics, you have to go to the biggest example in the last 15 years, and that brings us to Frozen 1. Now, is it weird to say that this movie is even better than Big Hero 6? Maybe, but it clearly has a virality to it for some sort of reason, and I think one of the highlights of it is it's not just following the genre of the time period, it's very much just blasting its own way through, somewhat. This is still 2013, so maybe you can make an argument that there was some elements that may have been influenced by the time, like the very fact that Elsa isn't saved by a man but by her own sister. But familial love is also a fairly standard cliche we've seen before. And really, when you think about it, like coming into it with a blank slate, it is quite fascinating to see. It's somehow sort of catching early the superhero genre, which I guess also makes sense. It's Marvel time is relevant at this point. But it's interesting that it's a singular superpowered character and then the world reacting around it. But you're not really here for the story of Frozen 1. It's not that spectacular anyway. Just a couple subversive characters in places in a way that's not necessarily properly built up and explored. But, oh, the music numbers? I can't unhear the music in this musical. It's so memorable. Because these things have been played so very often in all of our heads for all eternity now, it's like we're permanently gaslit into believing these are the best songs of all time. I don't remember how much I liked these songs the first time round, but I know them beat by now. And that could very well mean that the claim to fame for at least this movie is the song choices are the best we have seen so far this tier list. Funnily enough, we've not actually covered that many musicals in this entire list because we're focusing on the 3D ones. They've done a chunky amount of musical ones, and I guess they're all pretty good. They're above Frozen at this point. But a lot of them are in 2D, and we ain't covering 2D. Maybe I'll do a separate 2D tier list at some point. I've got them listed here in order. I just need to watch like 4 movies to catch up to the whole knowledge of it all. But hey, at least I don't make them anymore, so I can catch up. Yay. But no, I think this movie had the proper super fuse motivation to sort of elevate itself beyond just a normal standard Disney movie because the world itself is so whimsical. It does sort of spark that sense of creativity in it that I'm not surprised kids were invested. Having a more personal superhero story that could then expand into, ice powers, what can she do with that? What if there were others? The sister's normal and you can interact with that. There's an element of a cinematic universe in that the Tangled characters appear in the background of that thing. If I wasn't literally 17 years old when this movie came out, I might have been the kind of kid that was really fascinated to hear about all the different characters from all the Disney movies all coming together. Like Marvel, I just fell for the Marvel trap. I was 17, it was around about time I should fall for Marvel. But I think it's very clear that this is kind of the emblematic movie of the early 2010s for Disney that they've forever been trying to repeat the spark of. It was Lion King in the 1990s, and then it's Frozen 1 in the 2010s that they're forever trying to chase the tail of. It gives us just enough that's a good amount to run with to fully digest the story at hand. It doesn't exactly feel sped run through or anything to me, whilst also keeping things quite hands-off. Like, remember the Swedish merch salesman? Barely see him, but, like, it opens up to, like, ooh, there's more to see. I want to think about this in the downtime. Maybe not me personally, but clearly that was the opinion of the world. And sure, I guess not quite as emotive in a heavy sense, but certainly something you could discuss more, and it is a version for your kids, is the romantic interest being actually the betraying antagonist in the middle of the movie. Like, that's cool, good. Not like, wow, crazy, this is cinema, but it was cinema for a lot of young kids. Sort of learning that lesson of, hey, you can't just fall in love with the first guy you see immediately, subverting the very trends of Disney itself. This would be, to me, what should be the celebratory 100 years later kind of movie. It was like 90-ish years later, where they then subverted and modernized their own Disney tropes and formulas in a way that's less, regimented into certain roles. But maybe that's thinking about Frozen 1 a little bit too hard. It's just a funky snow movie with a fun comedic character that kids absolutely fell in love with. You don't need to think about it too much harder than that. It's just doing a good, standard, original Disney movie really, really well and nailing all the different directions. And then really succeeding on the marketing by actually uploading a song number on YouTube. That was the real success of the Frozen movies. Plugging it on YouTube, which I assume they still do, but somehow that's like the missing piece that I wonder if they even understand 12 years later. Even if it's done officially by them, use your other platforms, I'm sure they know this stuff, but I feel like I haven't seen it as much. To be fair, I'm not typically watching the Disney YouTube channel on my spare time anyway. Okay, next movie. This one's gonna be a bit of a weird take, but hey, it's my list. I'm going with a strange personal spin. Better than the original Frozen, I'm putting to the sequel to the knockoff of the not even official Disney movie in the first place. We mentioned the first one already in this list, and to me, the sequel that gets this high up in tier lists is indeed Planes 2, Fire and Rescue. Now, I think something's wrong with me. Valid. Now, I made a full-length, proper breakdown about this movie, so feel free to check out that terrible episode if you want to. But the conclusion, spoilers, that I came to that is that it's not actually that terrible. When you've got the universe of cars, and then you knock it off into planes, and then you have a chance to do it again, but maybe with a more original, interesting premise, turning it into a fire and rescue sort of dutiful, sacrificial job, learning the ways of how some institutions are built to keep people safe, is something that I just found really fascinating and cool, as if my inner child was enthralled by the idea of becoming a park ranger and a firefighter in the skies. This movie could very well just be standard crap that for some reason my heart is attaching to. It could very well just be some sort of US military propaganda, being like, oh, look at our men in the skies doing their dutiful thing. But this, to me, feels at least a little bit more heartfelt than maybe your likes of Top Gun Maverick and Captain Marvel or whatever the hell people jump on US military propaganda in. Because this isn't so much about the goals of the country as a whole, but just in keeping safety of civilians. There is something that I find genuinely noble about the career that they're trying to explore here, and they do some really nice things with it, you know? Cars is just about a rich narcissistic celebrity learning to be slightly less narcissistic, he's still rich, doing a race, right? Cars 2, spy drama. Cars 3, retirement of that same celebrity. Planes 1, it's Cars 1 again, but without the Cars 1 bits, just the racing part. But Planes 2, to me, feels like this real gem in the center of an otherwise bonkers and surface level story and universe. And though it doesn't do anything too extreme, there's not that much of an emotive weight about a lot of the elements. Like, there's a helicopter that's dead in the lore, and the guy saves a caravan couple as, like, the climax. There's something to me that really strikes as, like, this is a, ironically enough, powerful movie, even though they're just vehicles with eyes and mouths. Because it could very well open up the conversation for a child to be influenced by it, to either see their fellow people as like, there's something worth protecting, society or something, I don't know, he's going to become the Joker, according to my mind. But even just maybe that would influence someone to follow that kind of career, and to demonstrate something so strangely noble in a kid's movie is something we don't see that much, because it kind of falls into a weird, influential propaganda territory. But I just found this movie so well justified to exist than maybe the other 4 Cars universe movies that exist, all of the TV show episodes, the shorts, and the cancelled Trains movie that they were thinking of at one time. I don't know if this movie fully deserves it. Like, the villain is your most classic, cliche, capitalistic villain in existence. The original characters from the first movie are kind of forgotten and chucked to the side, and they have a couple integrations, but it's not whatever. The universe doesn't make sense because this Planes character then learns to gut his organs out and then rebuild it for an entirely different career. But at least it's not as bad as removing your body parts to become better and upgraded to win a race that would be dependent on your body parts, not on you as a person. So, that's just the problem with the Cars universe as a whole on the racing front. And really, if you were to predict how the plotline of a Planes fire story goes, yeah, it follows that pretty much to a T. But I don't know. Something about it just excites my inner child in a way that I can't really put into words beyond just it being somewhat familiar to when I watched movies as a kid myself. That sort of spark of motivation is the kind that I only now have nostalgia for when rewatching those old movies. This feels like a movie I could have watched 20 years ago and can watch now again with this incredibly nostalgic, warm, fuzzy feeling. Maybe the warm, fuzzy feeling's coming from the forest fire, but I don't know, man. Better than Frozen 1? Yeah, it's a bit more than standard. It opens up to a conversation more after the fact. I don't know, man. I just like it more. I like fire more than I like ice. I've got very sensitive fingers. That doesn't make sense. That's the wrong way around. But now you know I've got sensitive fingers. I hate public bathroom taps. The hot water's too hot for me. I do it anyway. Wash your hands. Ignore the scalding feeling. Anyway, side public bathroom ramble over. Let's move on to one you might be more agreeing of. I don't know, actually. Maybe I'm falling into a weirder rabbit hole as we continue here. But this next movie as well ignites a sort of nostalgic longing in a way that I hope is justified, whilst at the same time, visually, it's still not fully there yet. The movie I want to talk about next is Meet the Robinsons. A quirky little 3D movie that's very clearly early 3D movie time, but all about orphans and time travel, science, kooky characters, and a hell of a villain. This was again one of those movies that I would have watched on loop again and again when I go to sleep. I mean, what year was this? 2007. I was at the very end of that phase of my life. I was 10. And it's not to say that this movie particularly strikes me personally because of the themes of it. You know, the whole point is the protagonist is an orphan kid. I'm not quite an orphan kid, although I do only have one parent. But I don't think I ever hooked onto this movie for that reason. To be honest, I probably just followed the, hey, it's cool that they time travel element. But I think looking back at this movie and looking at it against all the other movies we're talking about today, this is one of the more extremely experimental and originally creative ideas that I think ever really came out of Disney. Like, they cover some strange topics here. It's fair enough to have an orphan smart kid in an orphanage, building the technology to make a time-traveling machine to go and see their own mother who abandoned them at the start. That's already cool enough. But then you see all the expansions it brings out in the future with all of these kooky characters doing a million different gimmicks and antics. You got a talking Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then the villain is this, like, robotic hat guy going through his whole adventure. I think it's the character work that really sells this movie. And something about it just makes it so memorable. Whilst feeling very, very smart, because it's a well enough done time travel movie. This probably would have been my very first time travel movie as a kid, other than the Back to the Future. And so to see sort of elements of the past, why am I talking like I'm gonna spoil you? You know the spoiler, you know who Goob is. But having that element of a character we know from the start in the early times is in fact the villain of the future is apparently something I never learned properly in my young media literacy brain, because friggin' Syndrome surprised me from Pixar. But even still, I think this movie came off as really smart and cool as a kid because of the science elements, and I liked the villain. I love me a Waluigi clone, and that's basically him to a T. But also, as an adult, you can come to really find it's really witty and funny in places. Mostly Goob, I just love my Waluigis. But then, even as a kid, you can sort of really sense the emotive weight of a child longing for their lost mother. And I think this was the first movie that I really noticed that sort of plot twist ending of you don't actually go for the thing that you want. Seeing the protagonist witnessing his mother dropping him off on a rainy night outside this orphanage, and then choosing to hesitate and then not even go for his mum in the first place, for he's found his own family anyway, is like, I don't know, man. They just don't make Disney movies like that anymore, you know? And I remember really feeling that as a kid, not because I wanted to see my missing mother, she was the one that was around for me personally, but like, there was something so special about being so blasé with some of the themes and the nuance that you're willing to show for some of these original stories. Whilst at the same time, I'd kind of argue seeing the futuristic family are like the least interesting part of the movie. They're quirky, they're funky, and it does look a little bit dated visually in places. Like, it just looks like roly-poly-oly in the background with the perfectly blue sky. But when it does get gritty, when it does get dark, when it gets green and grey, this movie really shines for that sort of grungy aesthetic and sense of pessimism that sort of floats around the protagonist and the villains themselves. Plus, you gotta love things like the parallels between the protagonist and the villains, both being orphans. One has a good ending, one has a bad ending, yada yada, you know, that kind of stuff all comes together nicely. I just think this movie is really, really neat, and it was one of the earliest examples of really, like, I don't know, strumming something within me. That I think this movie is very much one of those underrated Disney movies that's super spectacular in its own little bubble, that then never really went any much further than that. I think there was at one point an idea for a sequel, maybe a DVD sequel, that then got cancelled because I think they stopped doing straight to VHS DVD sequels. I remember it was suggested once to cancelled episode, but then it was literally, they were going to do it, and then they didn't, and that was all I had to go off of, so I would love personally more Meet the Robinsons content. The fact that we have Disney Plus and we don't have all of the IPs expanding seems like a very un-Disney thing to do. I'd welcome it. Would I? I don't know. It won't look like the old Meet the Robinsons. It would be very high quality, and in a sense that kind of ruins it by itself. Anyway, shall we move on? It's an outdated movie anyway. The future's bright. Alright, let's talk about this movie. Surprisingly high up on the tier list, especially for me personally, this is where I put in Disney's Encanto. And I'll be honest, when this movie came out, I wasn't that big of a fan of it. I thought it had a good chunk of missed opportunities in places where it could have done something slightly better than it did. I still kind of stand by some of those ideas, but I can also tell that I'm very much in the minority. This movie, again, had that kind of Frozen 1 element of being super viral, and I think I've grown to enjoy it for what it is more and more. I still think it could be a better movie if they'd made some different changes, but hey, isn't that most movies anyway? The fact of the matter is, the song choices themselves, they ain't bad. Again, I've heard these songs way too many times. They're good. I don't know what was wrong with the cinema screening I went to see, because I couldn't understand the lyrics that well the first time through, but from now on, I certainly know them. And at least it's got some of the green flags I mentioned of earlier movies, where it's not this big globe-trotting adventure, it's a more personal story set in a restricted location. Maybe this is what Disney succeeds in the most, man. They need to tell smaller stories that are easier to follow to enjoy. That's not always the case. Sometimes the globe-trotting ones are some of the best. But this movie, in what it tries to be as a big, generational family drama with some nice musical elements and bloody well superpowers in the era of superheroes. Yeah, I think this movie does a really damn good job. in a lot of ways. It's visually pleasing, the song choices are audibly pleasing, and though the ending to me felt a little bit fast, a little bit simple, all this build-up of, oh, we hate that one family member, oh, we hate him, and then we instantly hug him without more emotional weight behind it, I guess that's family for you. And there is at least a good chunk of emotional weight put in there. I just always think there could be more. But it's big and successful for a reason, and I think this movie does a really damn fine job of what it does. Not to mention, it does some nice subversions in a lot of ways and opens up for conversations with children. It's nice to see a super strong woman character, which is maybe a little bit late considering this is like 2022 or something, or 2021, excuse me, almost 2022. But at least it got there eventually in the end. All the while opening up this conversation about the different expectations and overstepping within families for a family movie is one that can hopefully open up conversations for children in the future. Even though some of these lessons seem like they're more for the parents and the grandparents, which, hey, judging by Wreck-It Ralph 2, doesn't always work in real life. But still, Disney movies, especially the musical ones, are meant to be just a nice fun time with a nice fun dance and song number along the way, and this movie really nails that element. The world has enough whimsy and wonder to it in seeing all the different superpowers and how they work, whilst having a good emotional core swinging at the bottom of it that keeps that sort of quality in writing going. All the while the story is nice, standard, it doesn't overstep any boundaries, and it's satisfying for the most part by the end of the day. I might be a little bit of a naysayer because it's not more, it's quite pulled back in a lot of ways. I feel like it's a bit watered down and safe, but perhaps safe is exactly what Disney needs, as this is probably the latest big success that Disney has had in the last few years. 3.5 years ago. I will concede that this movie is pretty damn great, even if it's not greater than all the movies that I'm now going to label above it. Or hey, maybe I'm just personally tired of the generational trauma problem. That could be a me thing as well. Or just the quick resolution, that too. That's my main gripe, is the quick resolution I don't like. But anyway, no more grumbling. We're at the top end of the tier list now. We're going to go to an honorable mention here, actually, as it's at this point I've got a question mark of a movie added into this list, because I don't really know if it counts as 2D or 3D. It's a brilliant blend done by Disney. This would be the part where I put in Treasure Planet. I think this more counts as a 2D movie, so I'm just going to take this here and say, hey, this is the segment where we're not mentioning Treasure Planet more than in this point, but this is where I would plug it. So you know, we'll do a proper breakdown of Treasure Planet over on our 2D version. Who knows where that is in comparison to all the ones around it? I don't know. You'll find out. Enjoy. But you know what? I think we've been getting lost on the way a little bit. Disney are animation. They can do anything they want when it comes to characters and character design. And when you think of classic Disney movies, you don't always think about a human princess. Sometimes what you need to see is outright animals. You remember Robin Hood, don't you? Those are the good old days. Here's the modern version of that. Up near the very top of our tier list is, of course, Zootropolis, the quintessential modern animal animated Disney movie. Again, these title labels, I gotta work on them, but this is so well put together. The world alone is so fascinating to see properly thought out and explored. It's not just a human story with animals as the characters. No, this is a full-on animal city, an animal universe with moving parts that are all thought out, not to mention an enthralling storyline that can turn into parallels within humans in order to open up conversations with your children after the fact. This is a Disney classic. This is the Disney formula, modernized and done brilliantly to a T. And you can chuck in all the jokes you want on the side. Rabbits are good at multiplying. The only thing I think that really brings it down is the fact that the next ones above this are really damn good. But also, it's just kind of more of a buddy cop story movie. It is a genre. It is a pretty standard thing. Oh, look, rivals into friendos. Cool. But just about everything else around this movie is so well put together. It is visual eye candy to see all the references and moving parts of how this world works. Not to mention the quality of the CGI is obviously pretty damn good. This is some late stage 2016 stuff, and it's clearly good enough to get itself a sequel. That says a lot for Disney. It also is a really interesting example of Disney being the most full-on they've ever really been when it comes to politics within their movies. In fact, politics even becomes part of the story in the fact that there are politician characters. But having this whole conversation about predators and prey and talking about the natural world and modernizing it for society and seeing that reflected in the different divisions we give for our own species really opens up some interesting storytelling beyond just this initial movie. But even here alone, it really sinks its teeth into some nice ideas and explorations. This is a quintessential kids movie for being great on the eyes, good storytelling, and then with really good themes and nuance worth talking about. And when it comes to the emotional swings of the movie, yeah, they're in there. They're pretty decent. There are some potentially harrowing directions this movie takes at times, like having predators all muzzled up as part of their childhood bullying. Like, that's mad stuff to see in a Disney movie, and it's somewhat brave of them to really showcase that, especially as the biggest people in the game. Now, of course, what this movie is really best known for is the sloth jokes, and I haven't really spoken much about the jokes in prior movies, but generally they're good until we get to the bottom of the tier list, and then they're bad. And here, yeah, like, the jokes are good. It's part of the world building and well thought out nuances of the different species that the jokes are just as successful as the actual world building and storyline itself. You've even got the hippie yoga characters in the full nude, but because it's a Disney lens, you can't see the parts anyway. Brilliant. It's cheeky. It's great when comedy is cheeky. That's the stuff that people seem to like the best. In fact, even more so than that, you know, there's a Disney Plus TV series. There's Zootropolis Plus if you want to get short stories based on some of the side characters in the universe, and that's again really, really good and helps justify its existence, and certainly justifies the existence of a sequel. This is one of those movies that clearly has room to grow and explore, and that's exactly what you want out of a good piece of storytelling. It just executes all of its ideals very well. It is, I guess, again, a modern Disney classic. Attached to some of the older tropes of actual classic Disney with the anthropomorphic character designs, leaning into that just universal plot line that brings in both kids and parents, and only seems to find more details the more you rewatch it as an adult. Whether it be some of the bigger themes that an adult is more likely to understand, or just Disney references in a Disney movie, or references to a cancelled project as well. This is just overall a super solid Disney movie, and it's the reason that this thing is very near to the top of this tier list. But there are some that in my mind still trounce it. Maybe trounce is the wrong word. But anyway, let's talk about Wreck-It Ralph. Sometimes it's still kind of wild to remember that Disney made a video game movie, and it's really, 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 really good. Considering it's only around about now that movies seem to even be getting on board with video games, if they even remember what decade of video games we're in, it's so refreshing to see a more modern take on video games, as much as these are based on the retro ones, but they're modernized in CGI, and able to do it in a way that's not just rattling keys, look at these references. Sonic's there, but he's not, you know, the main protagonist or anything. Instead, it has a genuine, really well done, thought out, emotional story with its characters as well. For adding an entirely new retro video game character into the mix, this does an absolutely stellar job that I believe this video game to be real. A world where all of your video game characters are real and alive and conscious, and they meet inside of the universal extension cable at the back of the arcades is an amazing, brilliant idea, and having them all intermix around is like, it's so good on just that premise alone, let alone the actual story they end up telling in a lot of lenses. The character of Vanellope at all being this sort of trodden down character that needs to be bolstered up in their own video game. The bittersweet existence of being a coded in villain, how you're treated by society for being bad and overpowering, an outcast. Finding solace in other outcasts finding each other and bolstering each other up in their own worlds. Not to mention the villain stuff and actually getting into the coding, bringing out the Konami code to bring out the actual code and rejigging electronics to change the realities with which they live in. This is a surprisingly intelligent piece of story writing, especially for what's meant to be like a Universal Kids movie, and they made it presentable to understand and enjoy. And it's so very heartfelt. It feels like despite it being a video game movie, this isn't just like a movie for the boys. There's a really nice nuance of just universal storytelling for the trials that these characters go through. And there's all sorts of things for more feminine girly girls to lock onto as well, if they're not crazy about video games, which in and of themselves gotta be universal, especially the arcade stuff. For a story that's basically a Pixar premise taken on by Disney, this movie far exceeds the quota that it needed to, and it's far beyond its unfortunate ending as a sequel turning into jingly keys. Look at the internet, wow. Even in that sequel, you could tell that the emotional core of the main characters is the only real diamond in the rough, whereas here, there's so much diamond, there is no rough. You can just enjoy this really heartfelt story of these tragic characters coming together, betraying each other, and then ultimately making a massive sacrifice for the good of all the people around them. And there's a Mario clone that gets with a really aggressive Helldivers-esque character. Brilliant cinema. Add on the fact that visually they've got some nice creative artistic choices, like the jitteriness of the characters in Wreck-It Ralph, and then references in actual people appearing like Q*bert and Pac-Man. Like, that's all nice as well. Not to mention Eggman and Street Fighter stuff. Like, it's really, really nice. There is some jingly keys. Apparently, I do like the jingly keys if it's in the right context. Either way, the point still remains, for what this movie was meant to be conceptually, it far exceeded what it was expected to be by my end anyway, and knowing that there's just a Disney video game movie in existence. And it ends up being one of the best, most memorable Disney movies ever made, especially for a non-musical original tale. Some of the repetitive lines and main themes of this movie are so ingrained as like quotes that I remember, and they come with so much emotional weight just remembering them. Thinking back to the moment when Ralph is diving down on the Mentos Coca-Cola volcano as well. Brilliant world building. You can show off all these different universes with different styles and mechanics. Brilliant way to expand your world in interesting directions. But anyway, having him come down and realizing that he may be a villain but he's not bad is like such a nuanced thought that you wouldn't really think a movie needs to explore outside of the context of being a video game. It just opens up so much more than probably the first line of a prompt this came in as what if video games had feelings. Man, this movie exceeds far beyond and is thankfully very well deservedly adored. But man, I adore it even more. But we have a couple more things to talk about. When you think of the quintessential Disney movie, you do not think of what if video games were alive, but you do think of the Disney princess. And what is one of the best examples of a Disney princess in their movie? It has to be Tangled. Now, this is an interesting movie because it came out right before Frozen 1, before they hit their whole new era of virality and direction. This was like their real solid attempt at just doing a classic princess fairy tale story that they somehow hadn't really adapted yet. We've seen Cinderella and Snow White and Little Mermaid and Belle and the Beast. But Tangled is like the quintessential storyline, the standard to see, and though it's not as well loved and adored and known necessarily as Frozen 1, it is such a good take on the story, and it just does everything really well in a way that's humble, you know? Something Frozen does not have anymore. Visually, Disney had finally started to centralize on how they wanted their 3D movies to look, and it works brilliantly. The hair as well, and the physics that came along with it, is almost reminiscent of Pixar pushing the boundaries of their CGI demonstrations, much like the fur in Monsters, Inc. and all that. And the songs, though not as well known as Frozen 1, are pretty damn good. I'll say it. I mean, that's not a hot take. I think people quite enjoy Tangled. Where this movie really exceeds is in the tone and the comedy that comes alongside this storyline. You know kind of the plot and premise as it goes. It is a very classic fairy tale we've heard probably multiple times over, but they managed to make such an endearing take on it as well with the Flynn Rider character, who, by the way, is played by Zachary Levi. I didn't quite realize that. Of course, visually built as trying to be one of the most attractive men around, but also they do some nice princess-prince subversions even early on here. He's not this all-powerful man that could just immediately solve a woman's problems like the original story was kind of, you know, classic archetypal fairy tale type stuff would do. But he's also actually kind of the butt of the joke in a way that's refreshing for how early a time it was. And it's just endlessly charming to see. Being able to befriend all of these crazy villains inside the pub is as well just like a nice twist on the story, whilst clearly having this brilliant, rich, emotional tone, like with the Lantern Festival and trying to find her real parents and the problems with their hair and getting it cut. And if Disney didn't have the super success of Frozen and instead ran with the more standard Tangled approach, I think I'd be more than happy with the sort of direction it takes. It's such an interesting little bottle of time in seeing the tone of Disney before they got big in a certain sense. I mean, they were more than big before that point. But I think Tangled is a really interesting example of a very fantastically well done movie for being just another classic princess adaptation, but not in quite the ways that we're used to seeing now, especially now, you know? The jokes are stellar, the characters are enthralling, And despite it being quite an archetypal story, it still manages to really hook you in a way that feels more like a Disney classic than Disney's years and years of floundering before and after this point. What a weird one. That being said, there is a movie that we have still not mentioned against all of this tier list, the one that beats absolutely everything else against this list. Finally, we've reached the end of our full list of every animated 3D Disney movie for this tier list. Of course, the very best one has to go to Valiant. Oops, I forgot about that one. Yeah, so it turns out there's a 3D Disney movie I haven't seen yet. Somehow I didn't realize that until I was recording this video. So I'm gonna have to put at least that one up to you. Where the hell does Valiant go? I assume it's mid to low? My apologies. I genuinely thought I'd researched every 3D movie. I thought I knew them all. It's like The Wild. I didn't know Disney made it. I thought it was somebody else back in those days. So tell me where you would put Valiant. But otherwise, don't worry. We'll get to the real top one. There is one more left. If you're any good at counting, you probably already know. To me, the number one 3D Disney movie has to be Moana. Ironic, really. It is actually the globe-trotting adventure that does it really, really well. Is it because of the runtime? No, it's still an hour and 47 minutes. What's wrong with me? On the dot, the same length as Raya? Really? Huh. I guess just something about the way it explains its world is just better in this one. Either way, this is the best case of a Disney princess. Sure, you've got the archetypal wearing a dress, has to be saved by a prince, all that kind of malarkey, sure. But this is where the real stuff kicks off. And I probably don't even need to tell you how good this damn movie is. Being based in Polynesian folklore, the world building of this movie is able to both step on an interesting exploration of world building, whilst also being culturally relevant and representative, which is really, really cool. And though it leans a little bit on the superheroism of a singular demigod, it kind of has the Frozen 1 element of there's only one superhero character. And it's a hint more personal in that he's just kind of helping on the boat. He's not the superhero of everything. He's not even the main character. He's a side guy. Instead, what you just have at its very core is human determination, reaching out into the endless void and the open seas with a hint of a little bit of fantastical elements in there. You gotta have a little bit of magic. You gotta have some sentient piece of water. You've got some Disney classics for what makes a Disney princess, and you've got to have an animal companion. Here, have like 3 of them. And then you just have this fascinating world of gods, ancestors, and spirits, opening up to all sorts of directions of whimsy, drama, action. The songs as well are absolutely fantastic. Moana 2 could never. Literally, they tried again and they literally could not do it again. And then when you really get into the spiritual element of this movie again, you get these really strong emotive swings again, like with the passing of an ancestor and the idea that your entire tribe in the afterlife are rooting for you to reach a certain goal as well. You have fun antics against a giant singing crab, and then you have these smaller moments here where it's like everything is so emotionally swelling and important. Having your villain be this big, giant monster that you don't defeat by punching them in the face like a good superhero would, and having a more nuanced, thematic take is so... It's not so much even subversive at this point, it's just like next level storytelling, really. And though I do love some of the expansions that the sequel touches on, I love the idea of Moana herself becoming a demigod and exploring elements there, and they have some more ancestor stuff in there as well, I guess. Yeah, that's great. This movie just supersedes all of its prior Disney movies, at least in my opinion, for being a brilliantly hitting the nail on the head, globe-trotting adventure, funnily enough, but with all of the spirit, all of the determination, all of the themes, the theme tunes, the characters that are brilliant even if they're played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and an ending that wraps it all together, comes back home and gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling at the end of it. It's funny, because Moana was actually the Disney movie I didn't actually see in cinemas, but when I did finally see it over at a friend's house, I was completely enthralled. It's funny, when you think of the big Disney movie, you probably do think of a more classic princess in a tower type story, but no, for me, I think the best example really is Moana. And there's a reason I think that this movie is now the most viewed on Disney+. Frozen might have had that lightning in a bottle viral moment on the internet when the songs went crazy, but the story doesn't quite hold it up as well as the songs do. In Moana, the songs are just as good, only reflective of the story itself. They go hand in hand in a way that no other Disney movie is more in sync with itself. And while the sequel is perhaps, it insists upon itself, this original right here is the biggest tail that Disney will always be chasing, for better or for worse. And there you go. That is my ranking of every Disney 3D animated movie. Soon enough, we'll do 2D movies. We've already done a ranking on Aardman movies, if you're interested in seeing that, and I'm probably going to make tier list out of every other movie. It helps with editing stuff in the future, because I have all the stuff prepared. So give me suggestions on other tier lists you'd like to see me all platter together. I have been speaking now for, 2 hours. More than that, so I could very much do with a break. You've seen the entire sun set over this video. Seriously, skip to the beginning again. Look at that bright light. It's natural light at the beginning of this video. Not anymore. Anyway, I really should end it off there, so my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell me your thoughts, where you'd list 3D movies. Is this list controversial? It could be. I make some interesting choices on tier lists. And on that note, I shall see you all in a little bit. Bye-bye!